You're listening to episode 74 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness teachers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Bradford Owen speaks with us today about his university-level course about mindfulness and communication. When you start meditating, and even after years of having a regular practice, you may notice there's a lot going on in your mind. All those thoughts, emotions, and in today's world, a constant cacophony of distracting sensory input. Imagine what it takes to single out a thought, put it into words, and then put it into the right words, and speak. And then when you're on the receiving end, there's focusing, hopefully, hearing, listening, receiving, and analyzing before you can even begin to check in with yourself about a potential response. And here's hoping you are able to navigate around just some of the inevitable bias we have as sensory beings. The wonder isn't that we have the occasional misunderstanding. The wonder is that we communicate successfully at all. Bradford Owen, PhD, is an associate professor of communication studies at California State University, San Bernardino, where he teaches film studies, digital video production, and quantitative research methods, and directs the CSUSB London Summer Program. A meditator since beginning a transcendental meditation practice more than 40 years ago, he completed the University of Massachusetts Medical School Center for Mindfulness requirements, which authorize him to teach MBSR in August 2015. He initiated and taught the 4-unit course Mindfulness and Communication in spring quarter 2016. Brad earned a BS in biology at Loyola Marymount University, an MBA in entrepreneurship, and MFA in film production degrees at the University of Southern California. He founded the LA-based production company ProFilm in the mid-1980s, through which he produced, directed, and edited more than 40 film and video projects. He returned to USC to earn a PhD in communication in 2006. Our guest today is Bradford Owen. Brad, thanks for being here.
Ted, it's my pleasure. I've been following your podcasts for about the last 4 years and getting so much out of them. So it's really my honor to join you.
And it's so great to be speaking with you because this is one of the circumstances where you're someone that I know that is a dear friend. And you're actually one of the few folks I've met in person. It's been on the podcast. And it's always just so delightful having the conversations that we've had over the years. And I'm so glad to be able to talk with you about this topic today. But let's start by having you talk a little bit about your background.
Thank you, Ted. I began a meditation practice when I was 17 years old, just as I was finishing high school. My aunt, who was a free spirit, had experimented with transcendental meditation, TM, and she told me about it. And I thought it sounded really interesting. So I took the official course and started that practice when I was 17 and really kept it up for the next 35 years or so, twice a day for 20 minutes. Along the way, I dabbled in Zen Buddhism a little bit. I lived not far from the Zen-Suji Soto Zen Temple in downtown Los Angeles, which I believe was the first Zen temple either in the United States or on the West Coast. I sat with them for a while, but found some of the rituals were a bit too ritualized for me. So I continued with the TM practice, and about 5 years ago or so, I began to think a lot more about mortality and about my own eventual death and that of the people that I love. And I felt I wanted something more to help deal with that existential anxiety. So I attended a few meetings at Noah Levine's Against the Stream in Santa Monica, and also at Inside LA, Trudy Goodman's place. And through various teachers, guest teachers, and permanent teachers in those facilities, I became more familiar with Vipassana practice and mindfulness practice. Along the way, I studied with Shenzhen Yang a bit, and eventually took Christiana Wolf's basic introductory MBSR course at Insight LA a few years ago, and became interested in the very scientific approach that MBSR takes. And then I thought that this would be a path I would love to go down to be able to learn to teach MBSR. So in the last year and a half, I've taken all the requirements to become an authorized MBSR teacher, and taught my first mindfulness course that was based on MBSR last spring.
So, Brad, you had your training at the Center for Mindfulness, and this is the UMass Center for Mindfulness for those who may be finding some others out there. Tell us a bit about your experience in going through the teacher training program to become a qualified MBSR teacher.
Ted, I went through the program pretty quickly. I did all the required courses in about 1 year, and I wasn't sure if this was going to be too intense, but it was a wonderful experience. It was just what I needed when I needed it. And I'm really grateful to the Center for Mindfulness for providing this rigorous, effective, compassionate training. It really gave me a foundation for going into the course that we're going to be talking about in the rest of the podcast.
I also want to mention and have you talk a little bit about your profession as an educator. Tell us a little bit about that as well.
Thank you, Ted. I started off my professional life as a filmmaker. I earned an MBA degree and MFA in film production degree from the University of Southern California. And for 10 years, I had a filmmaking business, just a small operation with me and one other person. Around the late 90s, I decided that I would like to pursue a career in academia. So I applied to various communication programs and completed a PhD and MA in communication, also from USC, in 2006. After a year of teaching in USC's London, UK program, I was hired at California State University, San Bernardino in the Communication Studies program, and that's where I've been teaching for 8 years.
Okay, great. And let's talk a little bit about this new course that you did. And one of the things that we want to unpack a little bit for those who are listening is that what you were teaching was based on, but not the MBSR course. So let's chat about that for just a moment. What was your class? What was the title, and what was the focus that might be a little different from MBSR?
The course was called Communication Studies 564, which is a topics in human and organizational communication. It's a kind of a placeholder course where courses with different topics can be offered. And the topic that I offered within Communication 564 was mindfulness and communication. I did base the curriculum on the MBSR 8-week course, but because I was offering it as a 4-unit course for credit that would be open to both undergraduate and graduate students, it needed to have a communication focus and also a more academic focus than the basic MBSR course offers.
So what were some of the modifications that you included and the inspirations you had? For example, a friend, Dan Houston.
When I wanted to develop this course and figure out a way to offer a course oriented to mindfulness with a communication focus, I did some research, and the only textbook that I found that had such a focus was one called Communicating Mindfully by Dan Houston, who is a professor at a community college in New Hampshire. And I contacted Dan and talked with him about the book and about the focus. And I thought it would be a wonderful book to use in the course. And indeed, it worked out beautifully.
So tell us a little bit about some of the differences between an MBSR course and this one with its focus on communication. What were some of those changes that you needed to make?
As you know, Ted, the MBSR course does have, it comes to a focus on communication around the midpoint in the course. And the modification that I made really was amplifying that focus on communication to take place throughout the course. Really what I did was take the MBSR curriculum, the very structured 8-week curriculum, and laid Dan's book over the MBSR curriculums. It worked out very well because Communicating Mindfully, the textbook, has about 10 chapters, and I used one chapter per week to go along with the MBSR curriculum.
And what was the response? How did that go during the class? Because this one's a little bit different than some other programs within academia.
It went very well, based on advice from the folks at the Center for Mindfulness, including yourself. I did very careful screenings of the students before allowing them to enroll in the course. I did the pre-interview that is recommended for anyone who wants to take MBSR. So the students knew that the course would be very experientially oriented and would involve a commitment to practice meditation of different types, about 45 minutes a day, 6 days a week. They knew what they were getting into, and I was so impressed with the commitment and the maturity that these students brought to the course. They range in age from 19 to 25, most of them. There was an older resuming student in her 50s or 60s, but most of them were conventional age undergraduate and graduate students, and they were wonderfully committed to the practice.
So during the course itself, I'm curious how some of the program went, because in a standard MBSR program, there's a great deal of sharing, and it can be deeply personal work. How did you handle that when it came to this overarching theme, this foundational theme for this course on communication? What did that look like in practice during class?
Ted, there's one really interesting aspect of that struck me from the beginning, which was a kind of gender split in the class. I had a group of undergraduate men who were intercollegiate athletes, and I'd had a couple of them in class before, and they learned about the class and then told some of their teammates about it. And these men who were about 20, 21 years of age, they tended to sit on one side of the circle. And the other half of the class, and it pretty much divided into 10 men and 10 women. 6 of the women were older, were graduate students, and they tended to sit on the other side of the class. And that difference tended to manifest a bit in this very open sharing pedagogy that we practice in NBSR. And this was not completely a gender split, but it tended to be that the women shared more, were more aware of what they were feeling and thinking, and the men tended to be a little bit more reticent and, not surprisingly, a bit shyer about sharing vulnerabilities, about sharing feelings. It may also have to do with several of them being athletes, and they perhaps were bringing instrumental orientation to the course, that they wanted to improve their athletic performance. Even though I had warned them in advance, it's best to come into the course with no goals or expectations other than to commit to the practice as deeply as possible.
Yeah, it's interesting. This divide has been a recent discussion online about the different ways men and women, and of course not perfectly across the board, but there are some tendencies of exactly what you've said. That's not very unusual. And it's also interesting that mentality, shall we say, of some of the folks who were sports folks in your class, and that, they may have run across George Mumford and his work with the Lakers and the Bulls and mindfulness with sports performance, and how they may have brought that in with them to the course, and it may have influenced things somewhat.
Yes, you're right. Many of them had some kind of practice organized by their coaches, either visualization exercises or relaxation exercises. And a couple of them at least, may have looked at this as another tool in their toolbox, which is fine, of course. And I must say, eventually they kind of warmed up to the process and were very open. And at a certain point, we began to have the opposite problem, which sometimes we see in undergraduate classrooms, of males being used to dominating conversations and tending to take over discussions.
Did that become something that you could explore in class? Or was that maybe a little difficult to get into?
I did approach that very gingerly because, of course, I didn't want to call anyone out. At one point, with one of the men in particular who was really tending to dominate the discussions, I did say to him after class that I really appreciated his contributions and they were very useful to the discussion, but I requested that he be aware of perhaps if he was the one who always spoke first, and etc.
And that's a very elegant way to handle it, and that's one of the things that is to be appreciated about good teachers, whether in academia or mindfulness programs or in really any endeavor, that these kinds of discussions don't need to be public within the classroom. They can be done afterwards in a way that respects the integrity of the person, that values their contributions, which you did, which is very nicely done. And you formed it as a question, like what, allowing others to also have a voice. And I think that sounds like a really good way to approach that challenge.
Thank you. Yes, you helped me prepare for dealing with those kinds of situations. I remember talking to you before we launched the class, and your advice was so helpful. Thank you, Ted.
Very glad to. So what were some of those aha moments or those realizations, or maybe some unexpected things that piqued your interest during class that you can share, if there are ones that you can share?
Something that was a surprise to me, Ted, was after one of the very first dyad exercises we did, where I asked students to pair off and talk about the assignment for the previous week. The first student would speak for 3 minutes without stopping, and the other student could only listen. And then we, of course, switched off. And then we came back to the group and shared what that experience was like of having to listen. And in one of the dyads, one of the students felt that their partner was not giving them sufficient nonverbal feedback. And they found that very awkward. But the way this person described it, it came off as harsh to the partner. And the partner started weeping during the group sharing. And I didn't really know what to do with that. I had warned the group in advance that we don't intervene, we don't pass Kleenex, we don't offer advice. We let happen what happens in the group. People experience and work through themselves whatever they're feeling. But I found that challenging. I wanted to cover her. I wanted to fix it. So that was a challenge myself.
And that always is. We do this because of a drive often to help. And again, you did a good foundational work with the students beforehand to make sure they're aware of this, that sometimes the best way to help, and in this context of a mindfulness program, is to experience things and not have to fix. Because when we're fixing, we're also maybe bringing in that a little bit of there's something wrong here, when this is just how we feel. And it may be unpleasant, it may be very pleasant, but we need to honor, acknowledge, and process that and allow it to happen. And that can be really, really hard to do.
Yes.
So this class it's finished now, and you've gotten feedback and student reviews. Say a little bit just about the tone of what you heard from the students in the class.
As I mentioned earlier, I was very, very impressed by the dedication of these 20 students to the practice. It's a large commitment to ask an undergraduate or a graduate student to commit to 45 minutes a day of body scan or mindfulness of breath meditation or yoga or combinations of those. And they were very committed. They came to class with an intention to get what they could get out of the practice. And I was so gratified and so grateful that the practice seemed to benefit them. They really benefited in various ways. And of course, as you know, Ted, the benefit of the practice can be what people need at the time. So some of the students were going through emotional difficulties of one kind or another. And through the practice, they began to take themselves a little bit less seriously. They began to be able to think of those difficult emotions as weather patterns in the sky, to use common metaphor, to get some distance from the challenges and the difficult feelings. Others found more, perhaps less dramatic, but very helpful benefits, such as sleeping better, being more aware of anxiety when they taught their courses. Several of the graduate students in the class themselves taught standalone sections of our basic oral communication class. And they reported that the practice helped them be more aware of their own anxiety around teaching and to manage that more effectively. Other students had gone through partnership breakups and were in a lot of pain over that. And they reported that the practice helped them manage that a bit more effectively.
So what are your thoughts? You're going to be offering this kind of class again?
I would love to offer this course every quarter, Ted.
I kind of figured.
I don't think my department chair will allow me to work it into the curriculum that frequently, but at this point, I plan to offer it again in spring quarter.
Brad, is there anything else that you want to share with the listeners?
Thank you. I should have said it before now, Ted, but I really would like to thank Dan Houston for his wonderful book and how helpful it was to the students and how well it integrated and meshed with the MBSR curriculum. Looking back now, Ted, on one thing that Bob Stahl, one of the teachers in the teaching practicum, said to us, a student asked, how do you look at the responsibility of teaching MBSR, of teaching meditation, that great responsibility of technique and approach, a practice that can be so helpful to people? And he said that the way he thought of it is it's really a matter of letting the Dharma flow through one as a teacher. It's not about taking control and being the guru on the stage. It's really about letting that wisdom flow through you. And I thought about that quite a lot as I was teaching and felt that I was fortunate enough to have the training and to have a long enough practice that some of that could come through me, and the student evaluations seem to provide evidence that that was the case.
Excellent. For folks who are listening to this episode, I will be putting a link to Dan Houston's book on here, as well as a link to Brad's information online if you'd like to reach out to him. Our guest today, Bradford Owen. Brad, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Ted. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.